Hello, everyone. We're going to start up the presentation. So today's topic is going to be on Azure Data Factory, specifically for analytics engineers and its integration with Snowflake. We're going to talk about a couple of things around kind of bringing data into Snowflake and then modifying data within Snowflake. Using Azure Data Factory as the main focus. So let's get started here. So first, we're gonna talk about kind of the CA Consulting. We're gonna go into a little bit more deeper into what is Azure Data Factory, key concepts, some key concepts we're gonna talk about, and then we'll go into the demo and kind of live demo about actually how to create some pipelines. So CA Consulting, we're basically a technical staffing and recruiting agency focused on kind of testing and evaluation of technical talent, specifically with a focus on data engineers, analytics engineers, data scientists, and data visualization experts within the Microsoft Azure platform. So talking about ADF. So ADF it's basically an ETL tool or an ELT tool. It's a successor to SQL Server Integration Services. So SQL Server Integration Services was basically an ETL tool, kind of traditional on-prem ETL tool. ADF is pretty much evolution of that in the cloud. It's a serverless technology, so there's no servers to manage, and you can connect to 100+ sources, including Snowflake, and basically you're performing the functionality of bringing data in from multiple sources into a database, kind of transform it and expose it, to your BI layers. So I would say a lot of the focus and the way it's kind of built around is to cater to the Microsoft platform, right? So where Microsoft generally, I'd say, incentivizes bringing data into the Microsoft platform, but there are use cases that we'll kind of talk about in this presentation where they've kind of added some functionality that does make it, it's an improvement on what ADF did before to make it work a little bit better with Snowflake. But we will talk about ADF and its features, but the focus of the talk, as I said, will be on Snowflake. So what do we mean when we say that we use Snowflake for analytics engineers? What does that mean? Basically, analytics engineers, for those of you who may not know, so it's a common term these days, is about, it's basically team members that are taking data that lands into your data warehouse, modifying it, and kind of creating clean and kind of curated data sets that are used for your kind of broad consumption for either for BI team members, data scientists, or other team members. And that's what we're gonna show. We're gonna show data being brought into Snowflake, and then how we modify it using ADF, and basically using the compute engine of Snowflake to take data that's already in Snowflake, kind of modify and transform it, and write it back into Snowflake using a script task. So this is something, if you were probably trying to do this before March 2022, some of these things that we're going to talk about, you wouldn't be able to do, because Microsoft had a copy task where you could bring data into Snowflake. But if you wanted to write queries or script tasks directly against Snowflake to do maybe a create as select statements within Snowflake, you weren't able to do those directly. There were ways to do it using Azure functions and so on, but there were really roundabout ways. So with the release of this script task that we're going to talk about a little bit more, you can write SQL directly against Snowflake. The script task also works with traditional like Microsoft SQL Server databases, but they added support for Snowflake as well. So now, before, when people would bring data into even SQL Server using Azure Data Factory, you'd bring data into SQL Server, and then you would create stored procedures within SQL Server, and then you would use ADF to call those straight procedures to then, write tables or modify data, and then, read from a source and write it back, into SQL Server. So you were dependent on having that stored procedure functionality. Within Snowflake, it's a little bit, it's not as straightforward to do those. There are ways to do it, but it's not as straightforward like it is in SQL Server. So we're going to show ways to, use cases for that script task that make it easier specifically for users that are trying to take raw data, transform it, and kind of create those curated data sets. So in here, I've got the link to that that announcement from Microsoft about the script data task. That's there if you want to kind of learn more about it, but we'll go into it using it. So next step. So a couple of key concepts I'll kind of go through with Azure Data Factory, and we'll go into the UI and we'll kind of talk more about it. But concepts and terms I'll use as part of this talk. One is integration runtime. Basically, you need this when you're setting up an Azure Data Factory job. It's basically a compute environment because it's a serverless technology, but you still need a compute environment that's doing the transformations and kind of doing the compute for the data that you're bringing in. So that's what we refer to as the integration runtime. If you're familiar with SSIS, in SSIS we had packages. It's basically it controls the flow of the task you're going to perform. Similar concept, we call them pipelines in Azure Data Factory. So folks that are from an SSIS background, that are in ADF, if you hear the word pipeline, you can think of it as similar to an SSIS package where you can do loops, conditional executions, kind of set up variables. You can execute child pipelines from parent pipelines. Not everything that's in SSIS is in ADF, but like for example, the script task is something new, but things are kind of more and more moving towards that direction. But generally, you can think of SSIS packages is akin to pipelines. Another term, link service, it's basically a connection to other services. So if you're in the Azure world, you see that term used a lot, link services, basically when one service is talking to another service. If you're talking about specifically with ADF, where we use that a lot is for connections that we had in SSIS. So if you're trying to connect to a data source, you have a link service to that data source, right? In our case, we're going to create a link service for Snowflake. We're going to create a link service for our data source to like a raw CSV file, but it's not just data sources. It's a little bit more, it's a more broader concept. It could be other services as well. For example, I've got KeyVault listed here. So KeyVault is a service within Microsoft Azure to store your credentials. So if I want my credentials not stored directly in my pipelines link service, but I want them abstracted to kind of another layer, so that in my Snowflake, I just have the name of my KeyVault, but the credentials are somewhere else. That's another service. So it's not necessarily just a data source, but it's another service that has my credentials to my data source. So that's something we're going to walk through. There's also terms called activities. There's a lot of activities within Azure Data Factory. We're going to focus on two. In this talk, we're going to talk about a copy data activity, which is basically moving data from one source to another. So this is generally when we talk about the ELT process, extract, load, transform. This is the extract and the load piece of it. You're going to use that using the copy data activity. You're copying data from different source systems, and you're loading it into another source system. And there's no real transformation. When you're doing a copy data activity, there's no real transformation that's happening. Then we have the script activity, which I introduced in the previous slide. This is what we're going to show is if you want to write SQL against your target, which in our case, it supports Snowflake and SQL Server. This is what we're going to use to kind of create our curated data set from the raw data that we're going to bring into Snowflake. Data sets are your kind of data mappings that your data mappings, like your logical data mappings to your source data. You can have it mapped to an actual table, or just you can write like a SQL query against it. So we'll talk about that as well. So what we're going to do basically as part of the demo here, we're going to copy data into like a raw table within Snowflake. We're going to use Data Factory, kind of take that to like a staging schema. We're going to run some validations against it. And then from there, we're going to write to like a final table. So that's going to be the general flow of the demo that we're going to do. And I'm going to switch over into the actual here is, this is basically the actual kind of, pipelines and options that we have that we're going to walk through. So within Azure Data Factory, this is your home. Here you can kind of create, you can kind of see like key things about your recent resources you've used, but let me come back here to the manage section. This is where you have for example, your link services. As you see, I've got link services to Snowflake. I've got different link services here. I've got a Snowflake link service that actually has credentials inside it. And I've got a link service with a KeyVault that I've created here that actually, basically it's an abstraction. I don't have the credentials here. I've got the associated KeyVault that's also a link service that goes back to a service that actually has my credentials. I've got a data set. This is my source data set. This is a link service to that it's a CSV file that I'm going to connect to that's stored in Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. So this is going to be my source that I created here. And this link service, this Azure Blob Storage, this is something we're going to talk about when you're copying data from an external source into Snowflake. It mimics something called like a copy command. And within Snowflake, if you have a CSV file, Snowflake makes you stage that data into like an external location. And then from there, you have to connect to it using like a SaaS URL. And that is something that like when you're trying to copy data into Snowflake, it kind of forces you to do. So we'll walk through those steps. And I've got a couple articles here that talk about that. So actually right here. So when you have an Azure container and you're trying to load data into, trying to copy data into Snowflake, it basically makes you kind of stage into an external area. So this is kind of what we're talking about here. I've got a connection here to that external staging area that I'm going to use to copy data into my Snowflake instance. So these are my link services. I've got an integration runtime. I've just got one here that I'm running. Another thing I will talk about is my Git integration. So the Git integration with Snowflake is a little bit, not with Snowflake, just with Azure Data Factory is a little bit, it's a little bit kind of, I'd say unconventional compared to other tools I've used. So the way you see, I've got a Git branch set up here, and it's connected to this Dallas BI ADF dev branch. But the way it works, let me see if I can bring it. So when you're doing your development, you're basically doing your development in, for example, if I change something here in a pipeline that I have, right? If I change something here, bring something here, and I just save it, I do save all. It saves it in something which is basically like a dev branch, right? From there, once I want to merge it into like a main branch, this is the branch that I set up. right? Like I quote unquote a master branch. So typically when you're doing your kind of CICD, you would have like a development branch that you would create, and maybe different teams are working in that development branch and creating their pipelines and different packages and different jobs. You would merge those into a master branch. And this master branch is where you publish to another branch that ADF creates for you, which is the ADF publish branch. So it's like you're still in your dev environment of your Azure Data Factory, but you've got like 3 different steps. You haven't even gone into like a QA or a prod yet. So in my case, when you set up a Git repository within Azure Data Factory, what we're really setting up, what I've set up where I showed you over here, what I showed you over here, this one is actually just the master branch, right? When you set up a Git repository with Azure Data Factory, like I said, you can have these branches, but with me, I'm working directly in this branch. I don't have a dev branch. I'm working directly in this branch. And then within this branch, you have the option to, this publish option appears in this branch. And then from this branch, you can basically, from this branch, you have to publish to this branch to push it out into your test and then in your prod. Right? So you can't go directly from your, your master branch into test and prod. You have to publish into the ADF publish branch to then go into kind of your test and prod. But I'm basically, I'm not going into like details of how to kind of publish it into the QA and the prod branch. I've just shown that, hey, like I've set up a kind of a main branch, and in the main branch is where I'm specifically working. The reason it's important to, when you're working in this kind of main branch that you publish from, you basically create ARM templates, which are objects that are used to kind of have your environment as code, like it creates ARM templates that let it know that, okay, these are the objects that exist, and then it uses those to deploy to your QA and dev. That's what, when you do the publish, that's what behind the scenes it's generating, like ADF is generating, and that's why you have to publish here before you move to the QA and prod. I'm not going to show those in this environment. I'm basically just going to work in the dev environment, but basically this is where you set it up. For me, I've got it set it up in GitHub. You can set up your Git branches with ADF with GitHub and with Azure DevOps, GitLab, and other tools. It does give you options to integrate with it, but when you're doing your deployments and creating those ARM templates, it's not as straightforward to do. So pretty much what's supported is Azure DevOps and GitHub for your integration. So that was your Git branch, and then you've got triggers. I don't have triggers here, but basically, if you're trying to schedule your jobs, you would come in here and you would set up your triggers. You've got your global parameters that are pretty much like your environment variables that you have in SSIS. That if you're trying to deploy from one environment, one ADF to another, and certain variables you want to keep kind of consistent, that's what global parameters function as. Let me go into pipelines here. So when you're actually trying to do development within Azure Data Factory, what typically we do development is you click on this author little pencil here that brings you to these different options to develop. And in here, you can see I've got a couple of different pipelines I've created: a test incremental, test copy. I've got like a count threshold, test load, and a test master. And I have data sets here as well that I've created that kind of have logical mappings to my data. So link service are just connections, But then if you want mappings, you know, actual kind of columns, that logical mapping happens inside these data sets. So, so I've got here, I'll start off with the copy task, copy pipeline. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of activities that you have here within Data Factory. You've got, like I said, I'm going to focus on copy, but this is like a new activity around, you can create data flows. And so on top of actually copying data, you can do transformations within, you know, it's like a GUI way of doing transformations. For those that are familiar to SSIS, the concept of data flows, it wasn't really there in ADF before, but this is something new that's coming in. I won't really cover it, but like there's a lot of other features that I'm kind of skipping. With Azure Functions, there's a lot of functionality that you can kind of customize ADF, things you want to do. You can do that using Azure Functions. You know, you can set up, if you have a Databricks job that you have, you can call that from your ADF pipeline as well. If you got Azure kind of machine learning kind of pipelines as well, built in Azure machine learning, you can call those from here as well. So it integrates with a lot of things. Like I said, we'll focus mostly on copy and the script. So the copy task, basically you have two main things. You've got your source and you've got your sink, which is your target. So in my data task, I've got a source here and I've got a source data set, which is delimited text 1. So if I preview the data here, basically I've got a raw CSV file here. This CSV file is actually, if I go into the delimited text data set here, this is basically a raw CSV file, which I have in a storage account inside Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 at this location. It's a comma separated file. Basically, I kind of specified that, hey, the first row is a header. And this kind of points to where my raw data is. So if I go back to here, so when we're trying to copy data, you specify the source. You know, in this case, it's a CSV file, and then I specify the sink. Now, actually, I don't give my link service here. The link service and the credentials and the connection information, that is actually in the data set that I have. So over here, I've got a link service is specified actually inside the data set. So over here, so this has all the credential information to connect to the source that I specified. So if I come back to the copy, so I've got that defined here. I defined the sink, and this is my, I've got a Snowflake table 1, which is basically it's a logical data set that I've created. If I open that up, and this is actually connected to my Snowflake credentials link service. And in this case, I've specified that this is actually a table. And in my Snowflake, I've got a table called, in a schema called, the database is dev, the schema is raw, and the table name is Dallas BI. So if I preview data, I probably will not have any data in here because I want to run this and show it being populated. So let me queue here. So if I go into my Snowflake, here, I've kind of set up kind of 3 layers in my Snowflake, in my dev environment. I've got a raw layer. So now with the copy data task, you have to have a table already created to write data to it. It won't create a table on the fly. With a script task, you can do that. You can do create table as and those things, but copy data task is like old. It's been there, but when you were for analytics engineering, where you want to kind of create a select statement and materialize it as a view or a table, you really couldn't do that with the copy data task. Because if you don't know what the structure of it is look like, and you don't have a table already created, and if it doesn't match exactly what your select has, you know, it won't work. You can't do it on the fly. So I've got a table here created, a raw table. So we already saw this has no data inside it. So let me just do a pull here, raw.dallas PI. If I run this, we will see that there's nothing in here. Okay, I gotta select the database here. So if I run this, there's no data in here. So now we're gonna go back in here into the test copy. And so now I haven't published this anywhere, and I'm not running it from like a triggered or scheduled job. If you're just debugging and you're trying to like test out your packages and you're trying to test out your jobs, you can just click on, you can validate here to validate your job. Actually, before I go into that, one other thing. So I've got my sync. So I'm saying that it's going to write to this, and it's going to write to the Dallas BI kind of table. I've got my mappings here. If I do an import schema option, it'll go into the actual source and it's pull its schema, and it'll go into the sync and it'll pull its schema, and then I can do the mappings over here. So you notice everything else it mapped automatically, like PTIDs, PTID, you know, this column matches word for word. It uses a column name, but these didn't match. I have a D value here and a value here. So these I had to, it'll be like an error that, hey, you're mapping this to the target, but there's nothing here. So you can go in manually in here and map it. One thing that, as I was saying, right now I have enable staging checked here, right? Remember I said that Snowflake makes you stage data before you bring it in. If I uncheck this and I click validate, it'll give me an error. It'll say that, hey, you haven't specified, your source is a CSV, and you haven't specified that like a staging area for it. If you have like Parquet and the other data sources, let me actually go in here. So this is another article that talks about a little bit more. Direct copy from Snowflake's only supported for the following formats: Parquet, delimit text, and JSON. But if you have a CSV, you basically have to do interim blob storage instance, which we already talked about. If I uncheck this, it'll give me an error when I do the validation that, hey, you need to set this up. Otherwise, I won't be able to run this job. So I've already done it here. I've already got a staging area. It's basically going to write to it. Then the copy command is going to pull from that and write it to my Dallas BI table. And it's basically just another kind of empty folder in blob storage that I specify. So now I've got it all set up. So I just click debug. So this is just a test run. It's not scheduled or anything. If you click this debug, whatever you have in that pipeline, it's going to execute everything. If I want to schedule it, I can add a trigger like I was showing, and it'll show up in that manage area where you can kind of trigger your jobs. So I will click debug here. So it's got about 17,000 rows that it'll pull in. So in here I'll also talk about once this loads, I'll go back. I believe so. The first time it's a little bit slow. Yeah.
17,000 to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe a spin of the compute resource.
Yeah.
So the staging area you were mentioning is for extracting the data from the Snowflake or
No,
importing into
loading into Snowflake. When you're loading data into Snowflake, you stage it in an external. Yes, not for Parquet or JSON or text limited files.
So you were mentioning that you make the link service.
Yes.
And the credentials are in the link service or in the KeyVault?
So this particular case, I use the data set use the credentials which are in the link service. Once this loads, I'll go back to how to use the other link service that had credentials in the KeyVault, and I'll walk through that as well. There we go. Okay.
If you had a chance, maybe later, I kind of forget about what the Databricks does. So what's the difference between the Databricks and the blob storage and the Azure?
So Databricks is like a totally different platform. It's like a Spark based platform. So it's a totally different service. It's just connected. You can, so once you use Databricks within Azure, you're using Azure just for the storage, but all the compute and the processing, you're paying separately to Databricks and have a separate Databricks kind of license to use their processing. Yeah. So I've got data loaded here. So this should bring the data in here. Let me do account star. So I've got 17,826 rows loaded here. Now my kind of goal is to take these rows from this kind of raw area, and I want to, stage the data. I want to bring some data from this into the raw area, but I don't want to bring it into these tables, right? This Inc. and Org Dallas BI. I want to create a table on the fly based on the select statement that I write, right? And I might want to materialize it as a view, or I might want to materialize it as a table. I want to have that flexibility and that option. So if I want to do that, actually, let me go into, you wanted to see KeyVault, right? Like how those are separate. Let me show that real quick. So in my credential, the one with credentials, I basically give my username and password right here. And I give the database name and the warehouse and the role that I'm going to use directly into the link service. So obviously, a lot of folks that may not work. You don't want to, for development, that may be fine, but if you want to have your production credentials and stuff, you don't want to hard code them in here. So you want to probably use if you want to use an abstracted layer on top of it, you can have a KeyVault. So over here, I have a KeyVault service that I created. And within the KeyVault service, I have a secret name. That secret name is basically all I'm referencing here. But within that secret name, I have an object that has my connection string. And the way that the connection string works is, let me open it up here. Just a second. Bring it over here. So basically, I give that connection string in this format. I have my Snowflake, my account number, I have my username that I enter here, and I have my password that I enter here. And this connection string is what I store inside the KeyVault. But when I reference it over here, I'm just referencing the KeyVault name and the secret name. But if I go into that, let's see if I refresh this here.
It's giving you like that error.
Yeah. I think I had my key, yeah, ADF dev, and this is my KeyVault here. This is within that resource group. I've got my ADF dev is where I'm working, doing my pipeline. I've got another, when I created another KeyVault, this is the KeyVault that it created that I'm referencing. And within that, I've got different secrets. The secret that I have here is ADF Snowflake JDBC, because it's a JDBC connection. And if I go here, this is what I'm referencing here. And then, you know, within that, if I go in here, I've got a kind of my secret version here. This is the string. This has my password and stuff saved in here. You know, if I show it, it'll show it. But basically, this is what I'm referencing. So you don't have, when you're creating a link service, you don't have to type those in. You know, it's saved off in here. So for the rest of these, I will use this the KeyVault option, the KeyVault credential to show that work. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're doing that in over here, I mean, your queries are still just the same, right? They just you know, they show up here just the same with whatever you define, right? So let me go into my pipeline. So I'm going to do a test load. So in here, I've got a pipeline created here, and I've got a script task that like I said, my requirement is I want to write a select statement, and I want to like template it so that I have an option to either materialize it as a table or materialize it as a view. I want to have that kind of the same test load pipeline that I'm creating. I want it to be able to handle both scenarios. Either I want to create a table or a view. I just want to provide the select statement, and I want it to do that. So in order to do that, I define certain kind of parameters here. The way I've created it, I've got a parameter called input SQL. This basically has my SQL statement that I wanted to run and bring the data in from my kind of raw table that I just created and take that data and then materialize it. So I have that as a parameter here where I'm kind of querying from the Dallas BI that table we just created. I don't have the database or the schema parameterized here, but you can further parameterize this from like a global parameter that we defined earlier. But here I'm just giving the straight SQL with you know, kind of two filters. Then I've said that the target name I want it to be is PT glucose, because it's basically CGM readings off a device. That's what the data is. So the object name is going to be this, and I want it to be materialized as a table, not as a view. My schema that I want to stage it to, I'm going to show like a blue-green deployment within Snowflake. So I'm going to write to a staging area, and then I'm gonna check some metrics on that staging area, and if the staging area is good, I'm gonna do an alter table swap from my staging area with my final schema. So it's within the same database, but I'm doing a swapping my tables from one schema to another. So, and then I've got something called a threshold here where I'm doing basically, it's like a test that I'm going to perform. I'm going to write data to a staging inside the staging schema, and I've got already a table in the final schema. So in my Snowflake, I've already got a table in my final schema, the PT glucose, and it's got 9,000 rows in here. And I want to make sure that the table that I write in my staging has at least 75% of the rows that are in my final before I do that swap, right? So I don't want to do that swap if it has less than 75% of the rows. So, I mean, you can have many kind of scenarios where, you know, you want to make sure that data is up to like par. You could have like unique constraints. You could have other constraints that you develop that you write to your staging area before you kind of write to your kind of final schema. that alter table command, I'm not sure how many of you guys have kind of used it with Snowflake. Basically, let's say the table, the staging table, it runs for like 8 minutes or 10 minutes, right? The select statement is pulling data and it's writing to the staging table. If you drop the final table, because that's where eventually the users are going to use it from, right? The final is the final location where the BI users and other users are connecting to. If you drop that final table and you create a brand new table and it's taking 8 minutes to run, for that 8 minutes, the users don't have any table to run against, right? So with that alter table swap with, you can write to the staging, and then the final table is there. You do your checks on the staging, and then the swap, it just changes the pointer. So the final table goes to the staging, and the staging table goes to the final. And there's no actual data movement. It's just a pointer switch that happens. So for your CICD using Snowflake, that's like a very common thing that you kind of see in other tools. You know, they leverage Snowflake like that. Some people do it at the database level, right? You could write everything to like a staged database, right? And then once everything is there, you can do a bunch of tests on it, checks on it, and then swap it at the database level. Or you can do, but a lot of organizations, they don't want to do that, right? They don't want to swap the whole database. You can even do it at the schema level, which obviously is more granular, but some organizations don't even want to do that. They might have certain kind of schema conventions they want to follow. So the most granular level is the table level, which is what I'm showing here. For each table, this pipeline that I have here is at the kind of table level. We're gonna kind of, if the threshold passes, we're gonna do a swap here. So within my script task, what do I have? So within the script task, it's kind of very simple. You still need a link service, right? And over here, I'm using the KeyVault. KeyVault link service that I created. One was with the credentials, the other one with the KeyVault. It's the same credentials, but it's just there's a one layer of abstraction. I'm referencing that here. And you can have a query or a non-query. The difference is if you have a query table, I think basically it's when you're expecting like a select statement, something to like pull data. If it's something that doesn't, you're supposed to use non-query. I've used like the alter table I've done with both, and it like works. So I know they separate them out here, but I've used it. I've used alter table also with the query and not non-query. But right now over here, this is going to be that select statement that I set up in my parameters. This input select statement, I'm setting it up here in my environment. So all those parameters that I defined, this is a little bit ugly here. It's not like super clean, but basically I'm constructing the SQL that I wanted to pass to the Snowflake environment, right? So within the script task, either I can just straight up, write a SQL statement here, and when I execute that, it'll just execute. But if you want to parameterize it in any way and you want to make it dynamic, you can do that by kind of going in here and using functions that the script task gives you. So you can reference like system variables in here. You've got different functions. For those familiar with SSIS, you had expressions in SSIS. Basically, that's what they called dynamic content in ADF. Basically, you can take data that's coming in your pipeline or code that's coming in your pipeline and modify it, make it dynamic, doing different like functions on it. So but in here, what I want to do is basically I'm using the concat function to say that, hey, create or replace. Basically, I'm constructing my SQL statement saying that, hey, create or replace. And this is my target type, which in my case, I'm saying, create or replace a table, which is a parameter. And then I'm giving that here as the name of the table. I'm saying this is the type of materialization, it's going to be a table. And then I'm over here, I'm constructing that I have a space in here. And then I'm giving the actual, the table name. I'm concatenating the database, the schema, which is the stage schema. These are all parameters that I define. I'm kind of clobbing together the SQL statement string in here. And I'm doing the target, which is my object name. And over here, I'm giving the input SQL that I had. So at the end of the day, it's going to basically create a create or replace table name, create or replace table, name of the table, and then the SQL statement that I give it. So once this happens, I've got a next step here. Now this is where I'm defining the threshold, the check that I'm doing here. This is actually an execute pipeline. So this is a higher level, and I'm calling the lower level pipeline beneath it. So for example, if I have a pipeline that I wanna, it's a standard thing I wanna create, that hey, if I have a source table and I wanna check counts against a target table, I can create a standard pipeline, right? That's gonna expect certain things, certain parameters, right? It's gonna expect the source table name. It's gonna suspect the target table name. It's gonna expect, hey, what percentage do they need to be off? I define those at the parent package, but I'm passing those into a child package. So over here, I'm just using the execute pipeline. This is just gonna call another pipeline. And within that, what I'm calling is another pipeline, which is test count threshold, which you see here is a totally separate pipeline. And basically, so in this step, I'm actually running the create table statement. And then after that staging table is there, I'm saying call this pipeline to actually check the counts. And if I go in here, the condition that I have here, I've got two other activities that I'm showing here. One is a lookup and one is a if condition. And what lookup does, it basically says, okay, check the counts from your staging table and check the counts from your final table. Basically, a lookup basically runs a query against your database and pulls results. That's all it does at the end of the day. It just does a look, that's the lookup piece of it. But in here, what I'm saying is, give me my staging table counts, give me my target table counts, and basically those are going to be numbers. The numbers that pull back, I'm going to save those in my pipeline, and then I'm going to pass them on to the next check, which is an if condition that I have. And the if condition is going to check against, it's going to use this greater than or equal to activity. It's going to check that, hey, what's the lookup value for me, which is T1. That's my percentage. I did a percentage from my staging and my final, and I stored it into a column called T1, and I'm referencing that here. And I say, compare that to the threshold. If T1 is greater than, like if, the value that I'm getting from T1, the percentage value that I'm getting is greater than, then go to the true section, what happens there. If not, go to the false section, which is my section here, which is basically over here. You can have like an email notification go out to somebody, but in here, I just have a failed task set up, which is just going to fail the pipeline. So it's basically going to go into the way you set it up. I've got hard-coded values here. Hey, the staging is less than 75%. You can make it dynamic to actually get the counts from if you want to display the counts from your staging table or your final table, you can add dynamic content here and kind of display those as well. But if I go, but basically this kind of child pipeline is expecting certain things. It's expecting the database name, the staging schema, the final schema, the threshold value, and the target object name. And those are what I provide from the top level over here. I provide those values, from the parent package, and those are passed down to the child package. So if I do execute pipeline here, you see when I define the child package, which is a test count threshold, I'm saying that, hey, whatever I define at the parent package, those parameters that I define at the parent package, just pass those on to the child package, which is what I've just referenced over here. Just the, from this pipeline, whatever the DB parameter is, pass that. From this pipeline, whatever the staging schema is, pass that to the child package. And then when I get to the final step, I've got another script task here where I use the same KeyVault. And this is where I'm saying I'm using query here, but I'm basically doing that alter table swap statement. If it passes here and if it doesn't fail, it'll move to the next step and do the alter table swap. So if I debug this, it's just double checking here, my statements, my object names, my threshold, and then I will click OK. This should succeed because the counts are going to be greater than 75%. After this, we will actually do another one, which will fail. This one ought to succeed. So this had created the table. It's calling the test. It's comparing the counts, and then it's going to do the alter table. So if I go back to my Snowflake, we'll see here that my stage, I didn't have a PT glucose table here. And this table here was created on 5/17 or 11? This final table it's 5/11, right? The date.
Yeah,
5/11. Yeah. So once I do the refresh, this 5/11 table is going to go into staging, and then the staging table that I just created, it's going to come into final. So if I do a refresh here, see this, the 5/11 table is over here, and the final table is just now 5/17 that I just created. So it did the alter statement, basically took whatever it had in the final, it just pointed it back to staging, and it took whatever table I just created in staging, it pointed it back into the final schema. So once that's done, let's do one where we actually try to fail it. If I go in here and I say, I want to run just low values. Word here. Yeah, that would actually help. Is that single? Does it have single commas there? Single apostrophe there? Yeah.
And it's single apostrophe.
Both sides?
Uh,
No, I think it just has one side.
Doesn't matter since you're trying to fail it.
Well, I wanted to fail at the 75%.
Oh,
I wanted to create the table in staging, but I wanted to fail it at hey, the counts don't match. So
we gotta have it fail the right way.
yeah. So anyway, so I've done this. So if I actually, I think it'll give me another chance to look at it here. Low. Yeah. So over here, so if I run this, it created the table. Now it's calling the test. So now it failed, and if I look at the output, it'll have that message that I had configured in there that it failed because of 75% of the data wasn't there. So with that, one other thing I wanted to show in here was, so if I mean, in your scripts for you can just call your SQL statements in here. You can basically do I have like an incremental example set up where I've got an incremental table, an original table, where if I wanted to have something set up where I take the max date from our original table, and if I check that, hey, if you've got dates greater than whatever the max date in the incremental table, pretty much load that into the incremental table. So I do that example with kind of set this variable as a select statement, select max load date as MD from this inc Dallas BI, and then I basically say insert into stage inc Dallas BI select star from stage original, but this is my original source table where load date is greater than MD, which is my variable that I created up here. So this is just another example just to show if you're writing kind of SQL statements, you can just do that directly in here. I had another lookup here. You could also do that as like a variable, instead of I'm doing it right in the script itself, you can save it. You can query the max date from the lookup, save it, and then pass that on. That you have different options. In the other step, I showed the lookup. Over here, I'm just showing the, insert statement to execute this. And now, like I said, in our case, in our kind of company, there was like what they wanted to do was like really make it modularized, where if you want to do like a loading of tables or loading of views, they wanted users just to be able to, they only wanted the analytics engineers to work on the SQL statement. That's all they wanted to do. So they work on the SQL statements, and when they open these template pipelines, and in there, all they have to do is just put in their SQL statement into that input SQL parameter, and then define if they want to materialize in a table or a view, and just schedule the job. And if they have a specific threshold values. I mean, threshold values, you can have them, static, so nobody can change them, right? Or if you want to give users ability what they want to define, just define those three things. Everything else is pretty much from an analytics engineer standpoint, you don't need to worry about how the data factory works, the connections and the data sets. And all that is encapsulated. It's like behind the scenes. You just work on your SQL statement. You plop that in here. Maybe you have a test like this, or you have other tests that are defined, like SQL-based tests defined, that you can use to that you can call as separate pipelines to plug into your kind of major pipeline to do certain tests. But the objective really was to make it so that it's not really something that the people that are writing SQL have to worry about trying to figure out with ADF. And kind of that's what I was trying to show.
When you use the script, does the script actually run in Snowflake?
Yeah. I mean, no, it runs in Snowflake. So all these statements, they're running in here. If I refresh it here, see this, it just ran.
Yeah, basically it just passed the script.
You basically pass the script. And I remember from our previous discussions, this is something like our organization was like really keen on, which is why they were looking at other ETL tools as well, that, hey, we don't want to do the processing, inside ADF. You bring data into the raw layer. Once that's what you use ADF for, you use those external tables, and because you pay for that blob storage, that external blob storage, right, that you're using to stage. Okay, we pay for it one time, bring it in. Once it's in there, any transformations you do, it's all Snowflake. Yeah. So that's all I had to present. I don't think there's kind of stop sharing. Any other questions? Cool.
So if you do more complicated